Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. So today's topic is going to be my fusion plan for getting the Christmas fusion for 2024, Lady Noelle. Now, right out of the gate, there are some interesting things to note about this fusion. One, it is a traditional style, which is kind of in the middle in terms of difficulty, where you do have to farm up or acquire all of the rares. You have to level them up and ascend them. You have to fuse them into the epics, and then take the epics, level those up as well, ascend them, and then fuse them into the legendary. Another thing is that she's also a void legendary champion, so you might want to think twice about skipping it, just because it's a lot harder to say that, oh, I'll just pull her later because she is a void legendary. And for those of us who are lower spenders or free to play like myself, you know that basically you get about 1 to 2 void legendaries a year, so banking on pulling her later is not your best bet. And lastly, she is a companion champion for Sir Nicholas, aka Santa Claus, in the game, and so there is some useful utility between the both of them, or synergy between the both of them. So if we take a look at her in the index, we can see the base stats pretty healthy on the HP and the defense. She is a support champion, so you'd expect as much. Again, void legendary, note. And then 105 on the base speed, so fairly quick on the higher end, but not one of the fastest champions in the game necessarily. Let's run through her kit really quickly, and then I'll tell you guys what I think about her power level overall. So on the A1, attacks on enemy has a 100% chance when booked of placing block buffs, and it also decreases their turn meter if they're already under a freeze, which could be from her. It could also be from Sir Nicholas from his A1, and these effects can't be resisted if Sir Nic is on the team. Not mandatory, but it is nonetheless a nice little bit of a bonus. Her A2 is one of her primary selling points, and it does target an ally. If they are under a sheep debuff, it will remove it, and if they're not under a sheep debuff, it will remove all debuffs from them instead, so a full cleanse, single target, which is of course fairly decent in the meta of polymorph and or Armanzas and Wukongs, who can definitely sheep people, so you can purge it off of them instead of having to wait the 1 to 2 turns as they slowly but surely ally attack their way to freedom. But if they aren't a sheep, it does go on a little bit more. It'll heal them by 50% of her max HP, which is relatively easy to do. Again, she has a relatively high base HP, 20,000, and you're going to want to build her fairly tanky, so she's going to have high HP. And then it's also going to heal all remaining allies equal to 50% of any surplus heal. So if you heal someone who's full HP by, let's say, 100k, for example, everyone else gets healed by 50,000, which is pretty substantial. And then the icing on the cake is that if the target is Sir Nicholas, it will instantly activate his Goodwill skill, which is notably his unkillable and continuous heal ability. And then I guess the cherry on top is that it also provides increased speed on all allies for 2 turns. Now, what I've heard from other CCs who do have test server access is that this ability is meant to target Sir Nicholas when he's on the team. It's meant to prioritize him when he's on the team, and it was not functioning in that way. It was a bug on the test server, but once it goes, I guess now it is live, but the expectation is that when they're paired together, she's going to prioritize him. Therefore, you're going to most likely expect to get his unkillable ability when they're together. On the A3, I believe, is her secondary selling point, which is a full team revive on a notably 3-turn cooldown, which was one of the lowest cooldown, if not the lowest cooldown on an AoE revive ability, but they come back with 50% HP and 50% turn meter, and then when booked, it has a 100% chance of placing a freeze on all enemies for 1 turn. The freeze cannot be resisted or blocked if Sir Nicholas is on the same team, so once again, her kit is augmented when they are paired together. Now, generally speaking, and I've been fairly outspoken about this, but I am not a fan of abilities where they can use them if there are no dead allies, meaning that she can just do an AoE freeze on a 3-turn cooldown and not revive anyone. And the main reason I don't like this style of ability is because when you need to revive people, it might not be off cooldown, unless you might actually wipe or die in the meantime because they just don't have it ready. But in this case, it is such a short cooldown, 3 turns, and also you're buying yourself CC in the meantime. So in a lot of PvE environments where she might be useful, she's essentially buying time for her to cycle back to this ability if people are dead, because she's freezing them. And enemy waves are usually typically fairly slow compared to how you're going to build her, and so you might be able to make it work in a lot of instances. On the passive here, decreases the speed of enemies under freeze debuffs by 10%, which is just kind of a nice bonus, synergizes well with her A3. And then whenever a sheep debuff expires on an ally, it fills their turn meter by 50%. So this is relatively substantial just by having her on the team, no cooldown or anything like that. Whenever you pop out of a sheep, your turn meter is going to be half full instead of being at 0, because that technically counts as your turn when you're attacking as the sheep. And then lastly, we have an aura here for speed in arena battles by 30%. It's no Odin or anything like that, but it is pretty substantial, one of the highest arena battle auras in the entire game. So overall, what do I think of her? I would give her probably on her own without Sir Nic. I think she's kind of in the realm of like a B+ champion, which is not bad, but I don't think she's really blowing anything away, just because she's like a healing, reviver, freeze, a little bit of CC, but she might be tough to build for certain things because typically you want your cleansers or that cleansers revivers to have high resistance, but if she has a high resistance, you may not have enough accuracy to actually land the freeze, so you're kind of giving up the freeze and it's just kind of a revive. And like I said earlier, she might be wasting it when no one's actually dead, and then she might not have enough accuracy to freeze if you're putting her to resisting so she can cleanse and do all the other stuff. So I can definitely see a little bit of counter synergy when it comes to trying to build her up to do things, but I will say that if you add Sir Nic to the composition, then she becomes more of an A+ champion. At that point, the A3 becomes irresistible, so you don't have to worry about what I just mentioned about not having enough accuracy, but also building with her with resistance to be the cleanser, healer, reviver for the team. And then most notably is that obviously this can trigger Sir Nicholas's unkillable ability. And so that does unlock a fairly straightforward Demon Lord Clan Boss team where you have Sir Nic running at a 4:3 ratio relative to Ultra Nightmare and Nightmare. And then she's running at a 1:1 ratio along with a bunch of other people running 1:1. And bare bones, you would just be unkillable forever because they would kind of alternate and trade off so that you're permanently under the unkillable between their two skills. And I guess I should mention that caveat here that if she uses her A2 or when she uses her A2 on Sir Nicholas, it will activate the skill regardless of whether or not it's on cooldown, and so you don't have to wait for Sir Nicholas to have it available. You can just activate it and it will act as if it is on cooldown, and then it won't put it on cooldown if he has it ready to go, so they're not stepping over each other's toes in that regard. I can also imagine that the great minds for Demon Lord Clan Boss, of which I'm not one of them, can also come up with a faster team, a 2-to-1 composition where you still use her and Sir Nicholas, but you take advantage of the fact that she is also placing AoE increased speed. You have maybe a buff extender, some turn meter filling, and you could probably go a 2-to-1 ratio, so it could just be a more improved version of the same team I just laid out. So overall, I think she's a decent champion. I think she's on the higher end of good, but I think it's up to you as the individual to decide if what she brings is something that you need. If you happen to be getting Sir Nicholas from the Titan event going on right now, and you're in need of a Demon Lord Clan Boss team, you're trying to get to Ultra Nightmare for the first time, then having this synergy would be very, very strong to push you towards that. If you just want a relatively strong AoE reviver on a 3-turn cooldown, she could be that. If you want a little bit of counterplay against Sheep, which is definitely pervasive in the higher ends or upper echelons of Arena, she can also do that. And so she could definitely fill a lot of different shoes, and it really depends on you and your account and what you need from her. In my case, my default setting is to go for every fusion, so I will be going for her. I don't necessarily have any plans to use her in the near term, but I do think, for Curse City, having an AoE freeze is always nice. Control is always nice in the Curse City. It's very important. And also it being a revive ability on top of her being able to heal and keep people alive is really, really strong. So I think that will probably be useful in some future stage of the Curse City. So if you are interested in pursuing her, then let's talk about my fusion plan for acquiring her. So this will be linked in the description box down below if you'd like to check it out for yourself. And we do have a breakdown of pretty much every single fusion going all the way back to Pythion, which is when I began this spreadsheet. In terms of the fusion itself, it is a mostly standard, but there is a little bit of a swap down the road that we'll talk about. But we do have the standard 4 dungeon split. We have 2 classic arena tournaments. We have a champion training tournament. Notably, it's only 3 days long, so we have a, I guess, shorter champion training to do overall in this case. We have a champion chase tournament, of course. My prediction or my guess is that it's going to be 2 X Sacreds. That's not confirmed, so we'll have to see and wait and see what that's going to be in the future. We notably only have 2 dungeon divers. We have 3 artifact enhancements, and in replacement for the 3rd divers, we do have 2 champion training events. One that's already going on right now that's live, and one that's kind of closing out the fusion, which is not actually a bad thing, because as we talked about earlier, you do have to level up all the rares and the epics, and so ending on champion training is really nice because you can spend the last few days, especially after all the dungeon tournaments end, just grinding all of the champions you need to level up the fusion, which is just a little bit of overlap and synergy, which is kind of nice to have. And then lastly, we do have, of course, a summon rush as part of the fusion as well. Now, the fact that we do have more champion training than usual is kind of a blessing, but also a curse, because as you can see down here, there is a lot of overlap between champion training and the ongoing dungeon tournaments. So we have a champion training overlapping with Fire Knight. This champion training tournament overlaps with Spider and Ice Golem. And then we have the last event that overlaps with Dragon. So you're going to have to use your energy appropriately over those days just to make sure that you're able to do everything if that is your goal. For those who who are unfamiliar with the spreadsheet, over here on the right hand side, we do have a summary / guesstimate of all the milestones for each of the events. Anything marked with an asterisk means it is a predicted amount based off historical precedent, so it may or may not be correct. And I always make sure to go in after the events are live to update them with the real values. Typically, the sticking points for a lot of people are the summoning events. So we have my prediction for the summon rush. I'm guessing that the lower milestone is going to be 2750, so around 5 sacreds worth plus some mystery shards. And I'm guessing because she's a void legendary and she has a relatively high power level, she's going to be the epic is going to be fairly expensive. The worst we've ever seen was 5500, which is 11 sacreds worth. That may or may not be the case, so don't quote me on that. It could be as low as 6, which is the lowest we've seen, but this is just my prediction. I think it's going to be on the higher end, but we'll have to wait and see. But if you were to go out there and get the epic, that would mean that you get to skip 4 events from the fusion, which notably, I guess the smartest thing to do would be to at least skip the champion chase. That way you're investing all of your shards in the summon rush and you don't have to pull anything for the champion chase. And then you might be able to also bypass Dungeon Divers Artifact Enhancement, which are typically the more costly events to participate in. In my particular case, for the champion chase, my plan is just to use a bunch of summonable champions. So I have Carnage to summon, I have Lady Mikage that I could summon, I have a couple of Broad Mauls, and I have like a Relic Keeper, and of course I have Remnant summons from the Cursed City. So most likely, even if it's 2500 or worst case 3000, which is probably the worst we've seen for a champion chase, I can literally do it without pulling any shards at all whatsoever. And so that is my going in plan, just because this is kind of over the holidays, which is another important thing to acknowledge for anyone who happens to celebrate Christmas. Of course, you have the Christmas going on during this time frame, and then that goes over to the weekend before New Year's, where you're going to have this champion chase. So a lot of people might not be wanting to commit to a lot of these later events just because they're spending time with their family appropriately. And because this is a traditional fusion, there is another tab also down here that is the fusion potion calculator. And so you can see we plugged in the values for Lady Noelle, 16 magic rares, and then 4 void epics. And thus this output here shows you how many potions you're going to need to be able to fuse the champion in the end. The main thing to note here is probably the void superiors at 24, but I also think that for most people who can farm Ultra Nightmare Clan boss, you don't typically have a bunch of void champions to level unless you're super lucky or you're spending a lot of money in the game, of course. And so I don't think a lot of people are going to be short the 24 for this, but if you are short the 24, then you're going to want to make sure that you're farming the void keep, because over the course of the fusion, you're only going to have 2 opportunities to do it, here on this Sunday and then here on the Sunday just before the fusion is ending. So keep that in mind if you don't have enough potions. The void keep is only open on Sunday, so you're going to have to plan accordingly. Now let's talk about some of the current events already going on in the game relative to the fusion, starting off with my supply count here, sitting just below 5,500 on the gems and then 74 million on the silver. What I like to do for fusions is that I like to benchmark where my supplies are at the beginning in terms of silver and gems, and then I summarize the delta by the end of the fusion with a post on my community tab page just to showcase the resources that I happen to spend over the course of a fusion, because a lot of people do have the mindset that fusions are super difficult to do, which can be true if you are not prepared for them, because I am like hyper prepared for fusions. They are relatively easy for me, but again, I just like to summarize the amount of supplies that it actually takes to get a fusion complete. So a couple things to note here. One, there is CVC starting tomorrow, and it is a personal reward CVC. So for at least for today, I'm most certainly holding off on doing anything relative to the fusion for the night, just because I want to do the bulk of that during CVC to maximize the amount of points. In a similar vein, there is also a Dungeon Divers event that is starting tomorrow. And despite the fact that the Fire Night tournament has already begun, we'll take a look at that in a second, I'm not going to do a Fire Night until tomorrow, just to double dip with the Dungeon Divers, just to make sure I'm being a little bit more efficient. The Fusion warm-up is still live. The Artifact Enhancement is live, as well as the first Champion Training event. Same logic there for the Artifact Enhancement. I have not started it yet because of CVC. You get points for leveling up gear, so I'm going to wait to do that when CVC is live. And then the Champion Training event, I've just been burning the energy that you get just from playing the game normally, not anything extra, and thus I'm already at 4,400, primarily because I had a bunch of new champions. For anyone who watched my last shard pull video, you'll know why, but I do have a bunch of champions to level, and so I took them as 6-star as quickly as possible, just with a daily accrual energy. And leveling up the chickens to 6-star them just gave me a ton of points, so that makes it a lot easier for me to get all the way out to 11,000, which is typically what I like to do. In this case, there isn't a legendary tome up for grabs, but Eternal Soul Essence is fairly hard to come by, and so for me in the end game, it is valuable for me to go all the way out there to 11,000. And then in terms of the tournaments, it's pretty short and sweet. Fire Night tournament is live, but as we talked about, we're not going to, at least I haven't started it yet, and I do recommend that you wait until Dungeon Divers is live before going for it. Of course, it also helps that it synergizes with CVC as well. So there you have it. That's going to do it for my fusion plan for Lady Noelle. Once again, that spreadsheet that I showed you will be linked in the description box down below if you want to check it out for yourself and take a look down memory lane at previous fusion and all the milestones that they offered as well. I do think she is a fairly decent and serviceable champion. She could be useful to a lot of people in particular situations, or she could definitely be a Vault Guardian if you're definitely more in the end game. And so again, you're gonna have to weigh that decision for yourself. I don't believe that she is a must-have champion, and in fact, I think she's a little bit overhyped for her power level. But that being said, again, she is a Void Legendary, so skipping her could be very, very costly if you're banking on pulling her in the future. That's just horrendously unlikely unless you're a spender in the game. Let me know in the comment section down below what your plans are. Are you going for the fusion? Are you skipping it? And what are your thoughts on her kit and her utility? As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And also feel free to hit that subscribe button down below if you are enjoying the content on the channel. Thanks for watching and have a good one.